Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Kim, licensed clinical psychologist and host of Love to Heal. Today, we have a special guest. He's a nurse practitioner and a relationship expert, and his name is John de Oca. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So good. People are wanting to know all about attachment styles. So since you're a relationship expert, I definitely wanted to have you on to break all of these down. Can you tell me first, how did you get into being a nurse practitioner?
Yeah, so I've been a nurse for, I want to say 13 years now. And I knew I always wanted to be a nurse practitioner. And I didn't know I wanted to do the whole relationship expert thing until it was my dream to work in plastic surgery, actually.
Okay.
So I used to do, and I still do sometimes, cosmetic injections and things like that. And then I wanted to form this business where I had this business model of holism in terms of plastic surgery. I've had my own experiences with it, and I feel like there's that particular patient that is looking so much to fix the outside when there's really something inside that needs work.
Mhm.
So that was my original business model. And then the passion just took away, and I was just like, you know what? I just want to do the relationship coaching.
That's incredible. So break that down for me more. So you saw that people were in their aesthetics, changing their aesthetics. Were they talking to you about deeper issues when they would come in to get something cosmetic done? Or how did that spark for you?
I think, it wasn't necessarily they were focusing on the deeper issues. It was like I could tell that they weren't focused on the deeper issues.
Got you.
So, and then, even my own experience, like with my own appearance and having plastic surgery myself, I think image is important, don't get me wrong, but sometimes we focus so much on the external and kind of ignore like all our internal work. And I think that's kind of how it came about. Yeah.
That's incredible. So a lot of times when people are going through breakups, they'll be hyper focused on the external and they'll think they need to post a certain picture. Obviously, working out is good for depression, so I'm not against that. But they'll think that it's all about appearance, or maybe that they were rejected based on appearance. And breaking down these attachment styles is really important because that can be one of the keys. Some things that were deeply rooted that are playing out now as far as dynamics can be a big factor as to why the breakup happened or why the person's not necessarily reaching out. Why do you think it's important for attachment styles to be learned by people that are either in relationships or going through a breakup?
Yeah, I think, as far as I see relationships, I think oftentimes we replay just a lot of patterns. And I think this is where attachment styles really come in. I remember when I had first picked up the book Attached and I had read it, and I was just like hooked. I mean, I was like a year of solid like reclusiveness in my own self-development journey, but that book really stood out to me. And I think oftentimes, especially my clients that I know that tend to jump from relationship to relationship, and they don't have that time where they're kind of single and exploring themselves, you could get lost in that pattern and it kind of all could blow up in your face at one point. So I think it's important, to have that time being single and kind of see what patterns have I had in relationships, how have I shown up in relationships, and kind of exploring things from that point of view.
I completely agree. So, how are they formed? People want to know, how are the attachment styles formed early on?
I think the research really shows that it's really based on parenting. I kind of believe it and I kind of don't. I really think it's like kind of what happened to you as you were growing up. But, they say that these attachment styles are formed based on the bonding with the parent. So, for example, your secure attachment style, when the infant was left alone and what's the word I'm looking for? You know, there was some fear, how the parents kind of attended to those needs kind of forms the attachment. So if they kind of let the baby cry too much, and too often, it could get that fearful, that anxious type, or even the opposite, where it's that avoidant attachment style as well.
Yeah, what I've seen a lot of times in patterns of people with avoidant attachment is that there wasn't a lot of emotional closeness early on. And that could be for so many reasons. It doesn't even mean that someone was malintended as far as a parental figure. It could just simply be the circumstance, or the person didn't have maybe the mother or father didn't have the capacity to be as close. So this doesn't all have to be negative, but it's something to learn, because it does play out in your current relationships. Let's talk a little bit about anxious attachment style. What do you know about that, and what do you think about it, and how does that play out in dynamics?
Well, I know this attachment style very well, as I feel like for a long time, I was an anxious attachment
Mm.
personality. And I think the best way to kind of put it into like a few words as possible, I always see like the chase. So these are your chasers. They're always worried about being left, or hyper focused of, does this person like me? Are we going to be together? It's just like almost that like grasping, if you will. That's the best way I could describe it.
Yeah, I completely agree. So in a practical way, what would that look like? That would look like the person is texting excessively, wanting reassurance, asking the other person often if they love them, if they like them. They're constantly asking their friends about them. They might be even thinking about them more, although that could even be equal among attachment styles and you just don't see it. But you're definitely going to see that interest is there, which can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. It just depends on how the relationship is playing out. Sometimes an anxious person can be with someone that is totally capable of reassuring them, but that can get draining after a while to constantly reassure, and it can be less attractive. So although you can have that attachment style, as you said, we can learn to become more secure over time, and then we're not so reactive, we're not so anxious, we're not always grabbing for our phone to see if that person is giving us that reassurance. It can be very difficult if you're after a breakup, if you're going through no contact. The person that's going to have the hardest time with that is going to be someone with an anxious attachment style. It's going to be really difficult. So let's talk about avoidant attachment also. Another form of what we call an insecure attachment. Again, we can reshape this over time, but what do you know about dismissive avoidant attachment? How do you think that plays out?
Yeah, I think this attachment style really comes, um, and this is just a generalization, like these are your more emotionally unavailable or your emotionally kind of absent figures. And these people tend to back off when a relationship gets too close. Um, that kind of emotional intimacy is problematic for this attachment style.
Definitely. And the dismissive avoidant in particular is usually going to be like, it's usually going to be the one that's more willing to criticize and feel like they're not willing to take as much ownership, because this was adaptive for them at one time. That actually helped them through life to feel like it's other people's problems that I'm going to externalize, and I'm not going to take as much ownership. And again, they are the ones that are a little bit more inclined to actually criticize, to make them feel more secure. So the dismissive avoidant one can be a little bit tough, and it could be the one that's very trying for the other person in the relationship. But again, with counseling or with just introspect, you can actually reshape that way. And then there's the fearful avoidant, and it's similar to what you're saying, is that the emotional closeness is a hard piece for them. But what do you think they do? They retreat, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah,
These are your runners.
they're
If you're
runners.
talking about that chaser runner tonight, these are your runners for sure.
They're runners for sure. So
Mhm.
they're fearful avoidant. And again, let's talk about just no contact after a breakup. It's going to be much more difficult, for them to want to reach out because they don't want drama. Remember, they're running away from drama. And I won't say that they're not going to ever initiate. What I will say is that I see that it takes more time. So even if they have just as many feelings as you do, just as intensive feelings, they're going to be the ones that are more fearful, and they're going to want to stay away, avoid intense emotions. And they have to confront that at some point if they want connection. And only when we see like avoidant personality disorder, as you know, does that become extremely pathological and they really need counseling to fix that. But if they're simply just fearful avoidant, they'll come around with time, but it can take a little bit longer for them.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
these people, these kind of clients, I think both of the avoidant attachment styles, what I've noticed too is that they typically are sometimes pursuing in the beginning when that relationship is new and there's not enough emotional depth. And then they kind of retreat as the relationship goes on. And this kind of leaves like the opposite person, like, what happened here?
You're so right. Actually, and it becomes more addictive because they feel like they're always chasing the dragon. It feels really addicting to have someone give you all of that attention at the beginning. Where did that go? How can I get that back? And it's hard to take that, it's hard to not take that personally, especially if you're a more anxious attachment style. How do I not take that personally when they were so into me at the beginning and now all of a sudden things started to get either a little bit more intense or we got committed, or maybe you wanted to take another step in a direction at the future, and that scared them off. That doesn't mean that you have to accept it. You definitely need to know what you're worth, what you want, and the product of that is that they're going to respect that decision too. So you don't want to just give in just because they're fearful avoidant and say, "Oh, that's their attachment style. I'm going to put up with it." What do you think about that? Do you think people sometimes just use that attachment style as an excuse for people to go ahead and behave in ways that they feel are uncomfortable for them?
It really depends. I definitely think the anxious attachment styles seem to pretty be familiar because these are the people that want to be in a relationship. They're almost doing the work. The other two, I'm not so sure because I don't even know if they realize that they're kind of in this pattern. I would say that the introspection would kind of shift more towards the anxious and the secure versus the other two. Ultimately, though, I really, when I'm working with clients, I really teach them, regardless of kind of what the issue is pay attention to what's on autopilot in your mind. Really get in tune with that because that kind of really fixed a lot of your relationship issues.
Tell me an example of that.
So think about like your own personal narrative, in terms of the way our mind works. Our subconscious is always running. It's taking in data that we don't even think of. It's how we kind of, drive home and we forget that we're driving. When you're kind of just sitting still and observing your thoughts, and I guess you could say this is meditating, but I don't really like focus on that word. Um, think about your dating style and kind of how you show up. So if you're like, oof, this feels too close to me. If that's the repetitive thought, then this is why you're running, and kind of get in tune with that. And then that's how you kind of adjust your behavior. And the same thing, the opposite, where if like you're grasping and you're like, I need to know what's going on here. I need to know. It's like, why do you need to know right now? You really can't control another person. So like, what is this burning desire to know in this relationship, kind of what's happening at this exact moment?
Yeah, and the polarizations can really push people away. So the anxious one wants to know right away, and that you're right, that can be perceived as controlling. People want their independence, and it's hard for someone with an anxious attachment style to give them that independence. And when you give someone, not give them, but when you understand that you have to be comfortable with their own autonomy, that makes them want to be with you more. So you don't want to have these extremes, you want to balance. And again, that can come with time and introspection. So we have the anxious attachment, the avoidant. Secure is obviously the most ideal. What do you know about secure and how do you think that plays out in dynamics?
Yeah, I think these are almost like the other styles balance. These are people that show up to relationships. They're able to have those difficult conversations. They're also able to express their own needs and meet the other person's needs as well. Um, I'm trying to think of anything else I could mention about them because you don't, I, especially in the relationship coaching world, you don't see too many of these coming for coaching.
So true. It's so
Yeah,
true. Yeah, and again, this isn't none of these things make people kind, really kind or bad, good or bad. It's none of that. It's really simply just looking at it. How are dynamics potentially shaped? And regardless of what happened in the past, it's just how it's playing out now. So to know what's your attachment now. And with emotion regulation, with distress tolerance, with practice, with mindfulness, being in the moment rather than being in the future, all of these things can be really helpful. I think people with avoidant attachment, what I've heard is I really like when they tell their partner or their ex or the person that they're dating that they like a little bit more space. You know, and I have to say they kind of have to be a broken record at times with that, because people don't understand it. They really equate space with disinterest. And that's the biggest misconception, and that's where we go wrong. They could be just as interested or even more interested, but they need their space. So you really want to keep an open ear out to what is comfortable. Are they a little bit more irritable when you're reaching out every other day when maybe their pace is every week? But then again, you still don't want to settle because you need to know what's good for you. So it's really, again, finding that balance. But a lot of times, those opposite attachment styles attract. So an
That's
anxious
true too.
attachment style, like the avoidant, it's more intense, it's exciting, it's passionate. But don't be surprised if that's not working out and there's a little bit more drama or frustration on both sides. But yeah, then you could annoy an avoidant attachment person one day, and then enough time goes by, and 2 weeks later they're calling you. So yeah, you just want to be sensitive to how people are, but you again want to also have your expectations. If you're a person that needs to be able to see that person once a week, find that compromise, but understand that you're probably on different sides of the world if the relationship is very intense. A lot of a peaceful relationship can look like someone who's worked on their styles. It can also look like two secure people, but with time, with age, and with introspection, that you can go in that direction, certainly.
I had a thought when you mentioned avoidant attachment style. And I think if I had to give them one piece of advice that I think that would help them in their relationships, whether it's with any kind of attachment style, tell people where you're at. If you need space, say, listen, I need space in this moment. I'll get back to you next week. And then just show up that way, because when someone knows where you are, it could put them at ease.
I agree so much. They're just one sentence. No matter what your attachment style, just one sentence, is the other avoidant can be offended too. Because you could be reactive. Now you're being extreme with not contacting them. And if it's just in a dating situation, you don't need to be not contacting. You could be extreme and just one sentence of, hey, I'm going through something or I need a little space. That's innocuous. That's not offensive. And if you're not doing that, if you're just simply not responding, you can't expect the other person to ever come back. I think we take risks every time we ghost someone. Again, when it's in a dating, I'm not talking about breakups on this, but when it's in a dating context, we take risks when we're not responding to the person to punish them or to be because we're fearful. So remember what they're worth to you. Play that out a few months. Do you really not want to be able to talk to them a few months? Because some people do get fed up with the ghosting or the avoidance or the passive aggressiveness or drama. So it's important to be cognizant of that. You're right, and I love that you're saying to communicate it, because that is the key. Very good. So I think you need to understand when you're inclined to act a certain way, to be reactive. Um, I think you can figure that out obviously online with a quiz. Obviously, working with someone like yourself is ideal, doing counseling of some sort. But there are basic quizzes online to try to figure that out. And I think you're right, just being attuned to your feelings. And you gotta work on positive distraction if it's so difficult for you to not have an answer right there. So what do you think the types that you see in your practice are the most?
I definitely see more anxious attachment, the most.
So do I. Yeah, so do I. Yeah, and it's not bad. I think that they have to have that experience with that breakup, for instance, in order to grow and to feel more secure. Because how painful, how distressing can it be to always be wondering what the other person is doing and thinking? And unfortunately, you're pushing people away a lot of times with that attachment style. So nobody's feeling good in that dynamic. And you could have this really strong love, this passion, and now it's being pushed away because you can't tolerate the distress of it. So I think it's a great, this is why I do think breakups can be so impactful, because not only can they have more potential to date someone that's on track with them, they could potentially attract their ex back if that ex is healthy, but they also really get to learn. So have you ever seen breakups be a good thing for people?
Yeah, I have this, it's my own universal law when it comes to relationships. I think that we will constantly attract the partners that are going to teach us the lessons we need to learn. The faster we learn the lesson, the faster we are to like a really, really good long-term relationship.
I really love that. So what kind of things are you working on now as far as your relationship expert practice?
Yeah, so I actually just rebranded because originally I was called Revisions by John Ryan when I wanted to incorporate, the plastic surgery kind of component.
Mhm.
Um, but then I changed it to the relationship prescriber because not only do I work with clients on romantic relationships, I do friendships and work relationships as well. So I'm in the process of rebranding. I am also creating courses like in each of those components so that, clients that may not be able to afford my one-on-one rate could work with me better and things of that nature.
That's beautiful. I love that you're helping people with friendships too, because a lot of this stuff applies to friendships. Friendships are so intense. Work relationships, even more so. People will, an avoidant, fearful avoidant will leave a job, anxious attachment, same thing. They'll be distressed all day. I think that is so incredibly impactful, important work that you're doing. So how can they find you?
Yeah, I'm on right now. I'm on Instagram at the Relationship Prescriber. Um, my website's under construction, but it's going to be the relationshipprescriber.com. Once that's up and running, it'll be on my Instagram. So I hope everyone goes and checks it out.
Yeah, you guys, you have to check out the Relationship Prescriber on IG. Thank you so much for being here today, John.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.